Thank you to the studio. I'm looking forward to kicking off this virtual event, and thank you for every one of you all who are attending. I am going to be speaking about reinventing marketing and marketers for a transformative age. And my talk is going to contain 4 sections. In the first section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the world that we are living in and the changes that are affecting all of us, because marketing and transformation is a subset of what's going on in the world. I will then speak about the changing media landscape, which I call ruptures in the mediascape. I will then move on to how marketing itself is being reinvented with a framework which I call the ABCDE of reinvented marketing. And I will end with how all of us as marketers have to transform ourselves, and all of us as individuals have to upgrade ourselves to remain relevant in these transformative times of new marketing. So let me begin with the world as we know it. The world as we know it has 4 dramatic changes going on. And these 4 changes are likely to persist well into the next 5 to 10 years. And therefore, whatever we do as businesses and individuals and marketers must keep in mind these changes. The 4 changes are: first is continued globalization. The second is demographic shifts in most countries. Third is the rise of technology. And fourth is the long-term impact of COVID-19. Globalization continues. We all know this. You all are living across Europe, but you all do business with everybody. This particular recording has me sitting in Chicago, being recorded in Europe. And globalization is pretty much unstoppable, but the only difference is the globalization is now becoming a multipolar form of globalization, with many, many countries involved in it, including new centers of power besides Europe and the United States, which includes countries like China and India. And we know globalization will be impactful because if you think about the challenges we face, whether it is the rise of China, climate change, or COVID-19, they're all global in nature. The second force really is demographic shifts. And in every country, including in Europe, there is a rapidly aging population. The same is happening in the United States. The same is happening in many places, including China. In China, for instance, 300 million people will be over 65 next year. And in many countries in Europe, including countries like Spain and many others, literally the population is declining. So you basically have a aging and declining population in many countries. At the very same stage, you have increasingly, because of immigration and other impact, a much more multi-ethnic society with its own challenges as well as opportunities. And third, a continued divide between urban areas and rural areas in every part of European countries as well as other countries. So those 3 shifts have to be kept in mind by marketers, which is the urban-rural divide, the aging of population in most countries, and sometimes a declining population in most countries, and also the rise of multi-ethnicity in most countries. The third is technology, and we are entering what I call the third connected age. The first connected age of technology began in 1993 with the invention of the World Wide Web, and we all connected to transact, and we all connected to discover. So we shopped and we discovered. We call that e-commerce, and we call that search, also known as Google and Amazon. In 2007, we entered the second connected age, built on the first connected age, and that was based on the reality that we were now connected all the time because of mobile phones, which we call mobile, and we were connected to everybody because of social networks, which we call social, also known as Facebook. So Apple and Facebook era, in addition to the Google and Amazon era. And that was 2007 to 2017. Now we've entered the third connected age, which builds on the first 2. And these are basically data connecting to data, which is machine learning and AI, much faster forms of connection, which is 5G, new ways of connecting, of which voice is first, and soon coming is augmented reality and virtual reality, and continuous connection to the cloud. And the fourth change is COVID-19. COVID-19 has been around with us for at least 18 months. It is unlikely to disappear for at least another year. This has impacted every one of us as individuals. We are rethinking work. We're rethinking our futures. It has obviously impacted business, including what an office might be in the future, and it has major implications on society. These four shifts are very dramatic: globalization, demographic shifts, the third connected age, and the impact of COVID-19, and all of us must keep that in mind. Now, a subset of these changes is the second part of my talk, which is the changes in the mediascape. The mediascape is changing in many ways. When we work through business or marketing, we communicate through a mediascape. And the media landscape has changed for a variety of reasons. The first reason that the media landscape has changed is there is no more media that is by itself pure breed. We still think of things like, television, or we think of print, or we think of radio, or even we sometimes organize ourselves into social and e-commerce and mobile. But today, in today's world, when, for instance, you go and you find an ad on Instagram for your local or grocery store or retailer that is running a video, and you're doing this on a mobile phone, and at the end of watching the video, you can buy a product, what exactly are you doing? Is it social? Is it mobile? Is it video? Is it e-commerce? Is it above the line? Is it below the line? And actually, if you then order something and pick it up on the store, is it offline or is it online? So the first big shift that we have to think about in the world of media is what I call ruptures in the mediascape. And the first rupture really is mongrel media, which is all media are merging into one type of media. So think about TikTok, think about Instagram, everything is merging into one. The second is the rise of voice. We've always thought about, for instance, the colonization of the eyes. We've always thought about watching things, but now increasingly, because of things like Google Home, Amazon Echo, Clubhouse, podcasting, we are now coming to another era, which is the importance of voice. We see cars being redesigned around voice, and increasingly with headphones and new ways of connecting, voice will be a very big part of the future of marketing. So mongrel media will be one, voice will be the second. The third, what we're going to basically see to a great extent, is the importance of privacy. Privacy is very important. It's very important in Europe, and it's going to be important all over the world because privacy is a human right. The day you and I are being watched, we no longer are ourselves. So you are not who you are when you are being watched. And as a result, marketers have to be very careful that as they try to identify people, people may purposely change the way they behave because they do not want to be identified. So how do you deal with a world of privacy becomes a significant impact for the future of marketing. So you have the impact of privacy, you have mongrel media, and you have basically the rise of voice, which becomes extremely sort of important, or the years. All of these are changing the media landscape as we know it. The changing world and the changing media landscape has completely reinvented marketing. And the way I describe it is I call it the ABCDE of marketing. And most marketers think about these five areas. A is for audience, B is for brands, C is for content, D is for data, and E is for enterprise or the company. What has changed over the years is the audience, A, is no longer audience. We should no longer just think about consumers, but we should think about people. Because if you only think about consumers, you think about things through the lens of your brand, but you never really understand someone unless you understand them as people. So think people, not consumers, when you think about audience. The second is your audience is no longer passive. They are participatory. They engage, they use social media, they interact, they connect. So, and often they will start a campaign. And the third big shift in audience is no longer are you finding large audiences and making them into small audiences, But the digital world, you start with audiences of one and you build up large audiences. So you go from segmentation to reaggregation. That's what a search engine does, or a particular buy on social media, where you find audiences one at a time, but you buy enough of them to get a large group. So in the world of audience, we no longer need to think about consumers, but people. We no longer have to think about passive audiences, but participants, and no longer about just taking large audiences and making them into small audiences, but taking the audiences of one and growing them into large audiences. That's the A in this A, B, C, D, E. B is brands. Brands continue to be extremely important, regardless of what everybody says. But brands increasingly are built in new ways, and they're increasingly built through experiences and interactions and not just communication. The other thing that's very important with brands today is, what does a brand stand for? What are its purposes? And so purpose becomes a very important part of a brand. And the third thing is employee joy. A brand cannot be a great brand unless the employees of that company feel happy. Because when people feel happy, they create ideas. They treat customers well, customer service well. So instead of only thinking about net promoter score and other things, we must think about employee joy. What does the employees feel? So inside a brand, employees as advocates, inside a brand, experiences, and inside a brand, purpose. These things are the new ways of building brands in addition to the old ways. C is content. It's very, very important to recognize that once we find somebody, which is what we call the plumbing of modern marketing, we do targeting and we do all kinds of optimization. But once we find somebody, what are we going to tell them? What is extremely important is to recognize that in order to succeed today, it's not just the plumbing, but the poetry, but the interaction. So how do you actually create content or interactions that move people? So think about plumbing, not poetry. Think about moving people with hearts and not just data. Human beings are moved by storytelling and emotions. Sometimes we get so data-driven we forget that. And the last thing is to also recognize there's a new world of content creators and content companies. Here in the United States, people watch the Oscars and they watch the Super Bowl and they watch the Olympics. But if you think about the total audience of those opening ceremonies of Olympics, the Super Bowl, or the Oscars, it's less than the total audience that Kylie Jenner gets in her Instagram account in the course of a week. So who is a content company and who is a content creator? There are millions of people who create content in TikTok, etc. So how does a brand understand this new world of content where there are new content creators, where it's important to move people's hearts and not just their minds? And also, to a great extent, what's the poetry, not the plumbing? If you reach the right person at the right time with the wrong interaction, is that any good at all? So that's content. D is data. We all believe data is important. Data, however, is like electricity. You can't live without it. It illuminates the way. But tell me how many companies today differentiate themselves on how they use electricity. That only happened when people were using candles and you had electricity. But every marketer, every brand recognizes the importance of data. And so to a great extent, data itself is not alone enough. It is important, but not enough. The other is most people's data is not actually very current. So these data lakes are filled with dead fish. So you don't really have current data. So how do you have current data? How do you partner with other people on data? How do you recognize that what you bring to data, which is insights and wisdom and people plus data, is what separates data? Those are the other things one has to understand in the world of brands or the world of marketing. And finally, E, which is enterprise. I've written often about something called the future does not fit in the containers of the past. And many companies, whether they're media companies, marketing companies, agencies, are organized sometimes in the way the world was and not the way the world is. So how do you operate in a world that optimizes for today as well as for tomorrow? I call that be schizophrenic but not paranoid. We're living in a collaborative age. We need to partner with each other, but we need to run models for today and tomorrow. The other is, how are you looking after your employees? Because if you're going to have employee joy, how do you basically create an enterprise that basically has that? So in many ways, rethinking your organization to build around customer journeys, to build around what the future needs are very important. We often don't change our company. We expect the world to change for our company, but that is not what is happening in the world of marketing. So literally, those are the 5 key shifts: A, B, C, D, E. Audience, brand, content, data, and enterprise are the 5 big shifts taking place in the world of marketing. I will now end with my very last section, which is, yes, the world is changing. Yes, the media landscape is changing. And yes, the world of the way we market in this ABCDE is changing. But real change does not happen. Real transformation does not happen. And real growth does not happen unless we change as people and as marketers, that we grow. Because only when we grow do our companies grow. Having a strategy is good. Having a reorganization plan is good. Having an M&A plan is good. But why is it good for the employees and people? How are we going to incentivize people to change? And how are we going to train people to change? Without that, change does not happen. And all of us as individuals have to upgrade our own mental operating systems. We care a lot about our physical operating systems, the way we exercise, how much we sleep, how much we eat. But what separates us from other people are our minds. And to that extent, are we thinking about how we build our minds? And to that, I would end with these 3 pieces of advice. The first piece of advice really is to spend an hour every day learning. If you are not learning all the time, we are beginning to die all the time. The world is changing, so we must learn. The second is to build a case for the exact opposite of what you believe. So when you are making a recommendation, think about the exact opposite why that might be true. The reason that's important is A, you can sell better if you know the other perspective, but also today because of algorithms, because of closed societies, because sometimes of our own closed mindsets, we get surrounded by things that make us feel good about ourselves, which almost means that we sometimes believe that our flatulence smells like Chanel 5, but it doesn't. So we have to build a case for the exact opposite. And third is to continuously learn. I will end this by basically saying you can get a few slides of exactly what I basically said at a site called rishad.substack.com, RISHADSUBSTACK.com. And that is something that I started as part of my learning process on how to learn Substack, which is a combination of an email management, content management, and a payment system. But in my case, it's completely free at rishad.substack.com. And I built a little media company because I wanted to learn and do new things. And as a result, now I reach 20,000 marketers every week. So in effect, learn, build the opposite case, and do, and we will thrive in the future. Thank you very much. And now back to the studio.
Good late evening, Rishad, or should I say good night?
Well, it's 1:30 in the morning, but I think it's somewhere between night and morning. I don't know.
Thanks for being with us, whether it's night or morning. And thank you very much for painting us a clear picture of the changed landscape we live in right now. Before we go into the questions from our audience, please tell us what's the topic and talk of the town in Chicago today?
Well, right now, the big topic in Chicago is we're about to enter Labor Day, which is the long weekend, and the temperature tends to change. So we've suddenly gone from being warm to cool. So people are saying winter is coming, and this is not about Game of Thrones.
Yeah, well, here in Finland we have winter all the time, so it doesn't matter much.
Yes,
Hey,
yes,
there's some
I've had the benefit of being there, so I know how cold it gets.
Okay, all right, all right. Hey, we have some questions from the audience. First of all, I think this is pretty good. How would you create a positive atmosphere for change in the organization? That's not always easy.
No. So there are 3 things I would do to create a positive atmosphere for change. The first is everybody in the company, including management, should be very open to speaking to each other truthfully. One of the things I remind people is you need diversity of voices, not just diversity of faces. And diversity of mindsets, but you also need diversity of voices. But you also want to be in a place where people can, what I call out the turd on the table, which is to tell people there's something wrong. Because if you can't speak up freely in an organization, and I'm not to say insult people, but tell people there's something wrong, you don't have the right culture. That I think is really number one. Second is you also have an organization and culture where, regardless of how senior or uh, a person is, if a person puts themselves ahead of the company, you must ask them to try to change that behavior because no one is more important than a company. But sometimes senior people think that's particularly true, which is three. And third is to also recognize that in the end, the most important part of a company is what I call employee joy. So, as much as we fixate on things like technology and customers and change, if we do not fixate on the human beings inside the company, it's very hard to have a great company.
Wise words, wise words. And if you think about Finland as a small country, quite monocultural country, at least in the history, the diversity thing is really up to come here a lot. And so is the joy of people as well.
It is, but even if everybody was but one of the interesting things that's important is, let's suppose you had diverse backgrounds, diversity of color, etc. If those people didn't have a voice, they weren't free to speak, you wouldn't really have diversity. So even if you're all monocultural, you all actually may all look alike, but you all don't think alike. So it's very important that people think differently and speak up.
Very, very important. Hey, what do you consider the biggest piece of learning you've had in the past weeks or months, so quite lately? The biggest piece of learning?
So I mentioned my this newsletter or this thought letter that is free that I send out at rishad.substack.com. I began to learn is that the most popular things I write are ones that educate and help people do their jobs. So there are two things I've learned. One is there's very little training being given to people. So when I write about things that do their job, they basically, those are very, very popular. So this week, you mentioned about this week, on Saturday or Sunday, which is when I publish, I wrote something about how we have to end writing presentations. We spend a lot of time writing PowerPoint presentations. So I basically explain why you shouldn't write presentations. And if you write presentations, your presentation should not be more than 9 slides long. And what I'm surprised is in less than, if you notice, my presentation was 4 slides or 5 slides. My whole stuff is, if you write more than 5 or 6 slides, you don't have anything to say. You're just filling it up with fluff. That particular piece, in less than 2.5 days, has been read over 100,000 times. It's my most popular piece. And so what I began to say is, when I write about 12 career lessons, which you can also see, or other things like how to think about the future of marketing, people get very excited. And so I'm now beginning to realize that people are not investing enough in learning and education in companies.
Definitely, that's true. And it's never too late to learn new things, right?
It never is. If I can learn at 62, you all who are far more talented and mostly younger can also learn.
Well, I don't know about the talent, but still. What is the most old-fashioned or outdated thing to do as a CMO? There must be something we must simply let go while focusing in all the new in our tables. What do you think? What is the most old-fashioned or outdated thing?
So the two most old-fashioned things are, one which is kind of surprising, which I mentioned in my talk, which is focusing on consumers or customers. Don't focus on consumers and customers. Chief marketing officers think about that. I would think about people instead. Because as I remind people, even a fantastic company like Procter and Gamble with all of its various products, if they only thought about consumers and customers, the only thing they'd learn is about my dirt removal habits. Because all of P&G's products, whether it's Tide or whatever, removes dirt. I don't define myself as dirt. So thinking about people as consumers makes people not understand people. So that's one. And the second one is to continue to actually start thinking in media channels, which doesn't make sense. because media is collapsing. So even today, having a social group and an e-commerce group or an offline group and an online group doesn't make any sense because everything is merging.
Thanks. And the last question, our theme today is courage. What is the most courageous thing you've done, either personally or in your work? What do you think?
Well, I think the most courageous thing that I've done is after a 38-year career where I was both successful and the company liked me, I decided to start a second career as a one-person company, writing, speaking, and advising. Now, of course, I continue to advise my old company, but when you spend 38 years running and being very senior in an 80,000 person company, and then you become a company of one, that's pretty interesting.
That sounds really inspiring as well. Hey, thank you, Rishad, once again for your time. Thank you very much.